Hi, all. Welcome to Empower Her podcast. I am Priya, and I have a very special guest with me today, Sydney. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm great.
Thing. So, just to give you a quick recap on what we're trying to do here is basically I talk to women from different careers, from different industries, different types of leaders that were trying to make a change in their industry or in their careers or in their professional paths and trying to make an impact on the people around them. And I shared their journeys, shared their stories here because I think it's important to do that in order to inspire other women as well, but not just inspire, but also kind of, be vulnerable and share their own, whether it's successes, whether it's, any kind of learnings that they've learned from any kind of professional or personal setbacks. So our purpose here is to, be open and be vulnerable and, try to inspire other women. So I'm going to hand it over to Sydney to give a quick introduction about herself. So there you go.
Great, thank you so much. So pleased to be here today and so flattered to be asked to share about my journey and other things related to the work that I do today. My name is Sydney Budgeon. I am a settler that was born on Treaty 7 territory, just north of Calgary, and currently residing today in Vancouver, the unceded and stolen lands of the Coast Salish, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I joined Dress for Success 5 years ago. I'm really excited to be talking about the work that we do, but sharing a little bit more about how I got to be here working for a nonprofit that empowers women into professional and personal success.
Amazing. And I especially wanted you to come here as well. I just wanted to kind of give a special shout out kind of here because, I mean, there are so many nonprofits here, but especially the ones that have helped me are, Dress for Success, definitely in my journey as an immigrant in Canada. So, really happy to talk about the work here that you're doing, and I hope that, people become more aware of it, what kind of work that you're trying to do here. Um, so yeah, let's get into it. I will start by asking you to talk a little bit about, tell our audience on what Dress for Success is and what is it trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dress for Success Vancouver is, we're a nonprofit that, again, helps women pursue their dreams and chase what they is self-defined as professional and personal success and economic empowerment. So it covers a lot, but what we're probably known for the most is the clothes. We were established originally in New York. We're a much larger organization than just Vancouver, with the intent to help women be suited for interviews and new jobs. Understanding that receiving professional clothing is a real barrier for lots of people who are struggling to make ends meet, or even just can't really justify using their savings to invest in clothing. um, I think that makes us a really unique charity because in a lot of ways we have roots in this kind of second wave idea of showing up professionally. What does that mean? How do you earn respect in an interview and all of that? But today I think we're also doing a lot more to challenge those notions as well. So while we realize that you kind of have to fit in order to play the game, we also want to change the game. And that's what really encourages me to really be a Dress for Success, because I see so much potential in the work that we do and how we continue to inform conversations about gender equity and parity in the workplace. Um, so yeah, we do other programs as well. So we offer one-on-one support for resumes and cover letters, prep for interviews, We have lots of workshops, both on personal development and professional development. We do cohort programs that include mentorship. So yeah, it's a really busy, a really busy space. Um, in addition to having these suiting appointments where women can get clothing for a special event or a new job or an interview. And that's it's a really dynamic small charity, I'd say, that's doing really great work. Being part of a larger worldwide network, we're kind of like a franchise, so kind of. So we have a lot of autonomy to do what we kind of see that needs to be done in our local geography, like geographical area. But we have the support of being able to connect with other employees for Dress for Success across the world, which is really cool. Like, we've got affiliates in Australia, in Mongolia, in Europe, uh, I think also in Nigeria. So, and I also just love learning about what people are doing in all those other spheres and how our work translates for a lot of different women across the world. Yeah.
No, amazing. Um, and then I think what the next part is about yourself. So
Mm.
when it comes to your career, how did that start? Was it something that you expected that you're going to end up in working at a nonprofit?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, so going back, I've always been a bit of a language and like a history and English nerd. So I actually, for the first early bit of my career, I really thought that I'd be working in museums or working in some sort of nonprofit that was more about history or more about kind of like the historical legacy of a lot of the way that our society is shaped. Um, and I bounced around a lot in my early 20s. I really took advantage of the resources that I had to be able to pursue like a degree that maybe wasn't the most employable. um, but I'm a huge believer in English degrees, which is one of the degrees I have, and creative writing, which is also part of it, as well as history, because I think that understanding our context and then being able to communicate about that are just like such important skills. And sure, it's not the typical business degree or engineering degree or anything like that, but it allows you to be more creative about how you utilize it and how you demonstrate its value. I made the decision to do a 1-year master's degree in history in Amsterdam, which was really fun, but also really taxing. It was it was actually with the NIOD Institute, which studies genocide and the Holocaust. So it was a really serious subject, but I really wanted to just learn and like dedicate my early 20s to learning. And I was able to use what I learned from that degree to be able to, write a thesis about genocide in Canada with the residential schools and displacement of Indigenous peoples within Canada, which is a topic I've always been really passionate about. And then from there, I kind of realized I actually wanted to play a bigger role in helping people today rather than helping us understand our history necessarily. While still doing that work for sure. But I think it was more about like, what, I actually really would like to be involved more in nonprofit work, maybe than academic work. Yeah, I did. That said, I did move to London after that and worked for a nonprofit that was what they call a learning society. So it's a society of academics. And this learning society was for political science academics. So we just supported the work of helping people understand the importance of politics and political literacy. And that was during Brexit, which was a hugely, yeah.
That's a very controversial kind of a right time.
Yeah, it was quite a time, and I was learning a lot about English politics, obviously. But that was it was the first place where I could cut my teeth on an actual job that I felt like really applied in the direction of what I wanted to be doing, and gave me the confidence, I think, to be able to really like, I think about the things I worried about when I was that age and how I was so concerned about what wasn't on my resume. I was so concerned about, my skills and like what was actually good about what I could do and what wasn't. And I mean, I got 3 promotions working there in 2 years. So I learned really quickly like how to work hard, or like how to show that I was working hard, and how to, adapt and, keep hustling through a first job. Um, so yeah, that was a really pivotal step in my career. But I have to admit, when my visa ended and I chose not to pursue trying to stay in the UK, my partner and I decided to move back, and we decided to move to Vancouver. I was pretty open about where I wanted to land, just knowing that Vancouver is a really competitive market, even in 2019 at the time. I mean, now so more than ever, but in 2019, it also felt really intense. And I wanted to, yeah, just be really open about who would kind of take me. And again, was still suffering from like a lack of confidence in my resume. So Dress for Success was one of the first jobs I applied to. Um, I had always been interested in working directly for women's causes, or like a women's focused charity or nonprofit. And I think, again, I had some imposter syndrome about kind of my credentials to be working with one. Um, I had tried taking women's studies classes in university, and I actually kind of got bullied out of one of them, which is not a good experience. No. So I never felt like I was like feminist enough, or that I was like, I don't know, that I didn't have the right knowledge to be able to be there with the right purpose. And I also didn't want to be taking a job away from somebody who maybe had a more like aligned lived experience to our clients than I did. But I also could relate, I relate on my empathy a lot, and and my passion to, to be able to not just serve others, but to be part of a community that is doing the work. And so that's what really interested me about Dress for Success. I will have to say, like, my first bit of time there, I was concerned about this. Like, are we just telling women how they should be dressing? Like, what other work is this organization doing? And it was an organization that was in transition. There was a lot of staff turnover. There was a new kind of order that was appearing. And it was really important to me that the organization was values aligned with me on that as well. And so it was really like, as I joined and I realized that my voice actually mattered right away, that was really incredible to be able to get that, that like, yeah, no, we agree.
Yeah, I think there's like few points where I would touch here. Is first of all, you said something really interesting about like your degree and your education, which is, how it's not about like what you do, but how you use it. So when it comes to like especially like creative fields, how would you define that? How would you say, oh, like this is how I
Mm.
used it? You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I read an article a few years back. This was before AI really launched, when we were anticipating AI, but it hadn't quite gotten on the scene yet. And the article said that some of the most useful degrees are going to be those creative degrees where AI can't, like, AI is only going to mimic what it can do based on a pattern. But if you have a degree where you're like having to do a lot of thinking that doesn't follow a pattern, or having to like basically be really human,
Mhm.
it's, that's going to be kind of irreplaceable. So I hope I stand true to that. I think it's leaning into your humanity, is really important, because being in an English with an English degree, you learn about how to interpret people's words, how to, realize what's being said between the lines, how to be able to communicate in a way that takes into all these different contexts. And I think that some people, the way that they structure maybe an email, let's say, they would do it the same way no matter who the audience is, or they won't understand the nuances of having to, you know, and I think being a woman in particular, we're so prone to like reading those contexts and taking into consideration like who our audience is and how this can land with someone a little bit more mindfully, or how to be direct and then be really passive, and all of that. So I think if I were to like kind of market my English degree today, I would say that like being a reader of people is really important,
Yeah.
because that's never going to change. That's just a human element in the work that you do. That is really important to be able to lean on. Um, in terms of like my history degree, I think that it's about, again, context and just like understanding the bigger picture, and being someone who can kind of zoom out to the bigger picture and then zoom into like the bigger, like the smaller details, because everything, as we all, when we study history in high school, you just memorize a bunch of events. It all kind of happens together. It's like this caused this, caused this, caused this. When you actually start studying it in university, it's more about the historiography. Like, how do we interpret history and how it's happened? Why do we tell the stories that we tell? What is the context on how, this situation has happened? And are we actually telling it the right way? And so when stuff happens, which a lot of stuff has happened in the last few years, let's take, for example, the discovered graves of at the residential schools, that were suddenly had just appeared. And it's like, no, there are communities that have been talking about this for a really, really long time. And it feels like a shock to a lot of Canadians because this is a part of history that we haven't really talked about. But this is something that shows up in people every single day. This is trauma that shows up in people every single day. And I was so thankful to my work at Dress for Success because I actually, taking those kind of pieces that I brought in from like an academic angle, could finally bridge that with a real true understanding of trauma and how trauma impacts all of us and how it shows up. But that's another conversation for probably a different time.
Yeah, and I think with history as well, when you go, go actually and study, I guess there's also a lot of things that, kind of connect individuals as well. So, for example, like if I'm looking at the history of India, but then I also look at the history of like other countries as well, you can connect some of the dots, and it just kind of like makes you understand how at the end of the day, like we're all humans. We're maybe like from different cultures and different kind of things, but there's like similarity in some ways, and that kind of like connects you in a way to that. But then also, you also need to learn about that from like any kind of like learnings as well, and how to be better, as
Yeah.
we go forward, with that. So I think, yeah, so those things are really important to um, study. But also I think something interesting that you really said was also about like interpreting those things, um, because at the end of the day those are all words.
Mm-hmm.
And you know I can't think of an example right now, but basically it has happened a lot of times where I've studied a couple of things. Oh, I've studied like one thing and then came back to it a couple of years later, and then it has completely changed,
Mm-hmm.
how I perceive it in a way, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
thing. So, yeah, that's something that really kind of amazes me in a way. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's adaptive. And I think it's important to be adaptive in the workplace. So if your brain's already wired for that adaptivity, to understand that, like, the work that you do now, a year from now, may not make as much sense because you've already moved away from that context. Instead of trying to make everything adhere to you and make the context fit around you. It's actually about the ever changingness of it. And language definitely is so much like that, and history as well. So yeah, I think it's kind of just making your brain pliable to those things.
Mhm. Uh, and now let's talk about um, when it comes to, your whole career. Obviously, you entered the nonprofit industry. Um, were there any particular barriers or any kind of challenges you saw when you entered that industry?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think that um, I'm forgetting the word right now, but the nonprofit industry is really interesting. And again, taking it back to the context of history, the origins of the nonprofit world come from charity, and where charity comes from is this idea that people who are privileged and have wealth can feel better about their privilege and wealth by deciding to donate some of it to a cause that they think is valid. Back with the Victorians, and this is problematic in so many ways. So this is something that the nonprofit world is dealing with all the time, because it shouldn't be about what wealthy and privileged people decide is important. It should be about the equity of building in a more equitable society and what actually we expect from people who have privilege, um, instead of the other way around. And there's tension in that because, of course, working for a nonprofit, we rely on funding, we rely on donors, we rely on massive companies who do take advantage of people to give us money to be able to value our programming. We also rely on government a lot for that as well. And as more, there is a trend that, the government services are being outsourced to more and more nonprofits, but, grant opportunities are getting fewer and fewer and farther in between. So it is a place that is rife with struggle. That said, I know a lot of the struggles that I've ever mentioned, like the tensions, the day-to-day challenges of working for a nonprofit, are not unique to working at a nonprofit. People are struggling with this across all fields of work, having less resources, having to do more in less time, having to really hustle. So that's not something I'm going to say. It's like I am like we're facing it more than other people. That's not true. But the tensions just with how a charity operates and how the nonprofit world is currently built is difficult to navigate. And so we call people into the work. That's what we do. We don't want to use shame to make people feel like they should support our cause. We want to communicate the real value. And a lot of times there's just a real economic benefit to be told, a story to be told there. There are studies that having a more diverse workplace yields higher profits. So large and small companies should be really invested in, women of color, women in the queer communities, um, women who have disabilities, excelling in their companies, and being able to be there. But being able to be there is a struggle. So yeah, it's a really interesting time, for sure. I think it's always been a really interesting time. I think we now have more self-awareness than we ever did. I think that when we look at how people identify with us in terms of their values, that of course those values are shifting. I think that there's more openness among, to have these conversations around things like race and intersections and really what the work is. But there is still a holdover that it is just kind of this like we rely on the benevolence of other people, and that they are the most important reason as to why our work works, instead of we are a really holistic community that is we're all in this together and we will all benefit together if we all invest and put time and money into what needs to happen.
Mhm.
Um, So and the other thing I think, like on a personal level, just going into small nonprofits, this is the double-edged sword I always talk about with small nonprofits is, in my experience, there's lots of movement in small nonprofits. There's lots of turnover. If you are a really hard worker and you're willing to take a pay cut, you can you can like kind of go up the ladder if you really just like stick in. Um, but then you're working in a place that suffers from a lot of turnover. There's, again, a lot of less resources. And to be honest, I'm in a really privileged position to be able to choose that option, to be able to kind of grind through that. Some people aren't. And I think that's also why nonprofits don't have um, the diversity that we should be seeing, because a lot of these should be led from within the communities that are affected by them. Um, I want to be in service of other people, and I think that's really important. Like I couldn't find any drive working for a for-profit company trying to sell something. I just like there would be no reason for me to show up. um, and I get so much benefit from working from a small nonprofit. Like I learn so much every single day. I become a better human by meeting the humans that I meet through my work. And I honestly, like, whatever the tax is on my salary for working for a nonprofit, the benefits are just like far outweigh that in so many ways. But it should be more equitable, and it should be a choice that doesn't feel like a sacrifice, particularly for anyone who has the lived experience of it or is within the communities that we're trying to serve. And so that's where my concerns are the most. But on a personal level, like one-to-one level, just, you'll work hard and you'll probably see like really great outcomes, but it is a lot of hard work.
Yeah, I think that's also something really interesting about the industry. And I just want to make sure that, whoever is, listening, maybe they're thinking about getting into that industry, or maybe they're like exploring different kind of careers. There is like a really tough reality around the nonprofit industry that, you kind of have to acknowledge. Yes, it's not really something that, if someone is, you have to make that choice for yourself that, oh, like, am I working to like make a lot of money, or is there like a purpose or like passion kind of behind it? And maybe you're privileged, and then you're okay when it comes to like financial
Yeah,
um, support as well. So you really have to like think about those things and kind of make
yeah,
that choice, because yeah, there's like with every industry there's like pros and cons,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. And I hope that the business world, like outside of nonprofits, it continues to veer into like these categories of social good, because I think that any person should deserves to work for an organization that they think is doing really good work, and that isn't just a paycheck. Like, that's my hope.
Mhm.
And that they're not feeling like they're compromising their values in order to be able to build that security that they need for themselves or their family, or even just their dreams and their aspirations.
Mhm.
I'm privileged to be part of the comfort class. So like my salary that I draw is not great. My partner and I do kind of live paycheck to paycheck in a lot of ways, but we have a huge support system in place with our parents, and my other, like, the other assets that we have within the family. So
Mhm.
that is it does it. I read a really good article about this in like the Atlantic recently. It changes the way that you think. It
Mhm.
changes the decisions you make. If you're somebody who could be homeless, if you didn't earn a certain amount of money within like a 2 week period, you're going to make different decisions.
Mhm.
You just are. So
Mhm.
I think it's really good to be open about that, and to not, again, I don't say this to, I mean, I think a lot of people are really defensive about being part of the comfort class.
Mhm.
I'm not. It's just what my reality is right now.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and, in the same way, I just hope that at least I'm using my privilege
Mhm.
for at least something that's better than just
Yeah.
making more and more money. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's totally a choice, and um, that's all I'm talking about. Like,
Yeah.
where that's where like your values can come in. Yeah, sure, there might be people who might be, of that class, and they want more money, and that's okay. That's your choice. That's, um, but yeah, again, that's where you have to like kind of explore what your values are, and then, what kind of choices you want to make, what kind of life do you want to live.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, I think that was really interesting. um, and then I wanted to talk, a little bit about, um, kind of like, when it comes to your career, was there like a setback that
Mm.
you faced, and what happened, and how did you deal with it? What did you learn from it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, yeah, my career has never been like completely smooth. It's been pretty scrappy at times. um, I've worked for some, I've worked with and for some really difficult people, and I've worked with and for some really amazing people. And I think that that's always going to be a factor, is just like who you work with, how you work together, and all that kind of stuff. But I did face a significant or more significant professional setback working for Dress for Success in the last few years. During the pandemic, things were really hard. A third of charities were shutting down, or nonprofits were shutting down, because they couldn't get the funding, or their work didn't really work within the confines of a pandemic. So we had to do a lot of hustling to make sure that our work translated to like a virtual model. And I'm not gonna be like humble about this, but I did a lot of that like work for us, using my like technical kind of like what I could learn, and then translating that, moving a lot of those services virtually, was a really big push that I had to do. And I already came off of a lot of really big pushes in my previous job, working for, for someone who was really ambitious and had a lot of ambitious projects that they wanted done within a 2-year span. So that, that currently, that ambition like is great, because it gives my mind something to do, and I love being busy, and sometimes I love working the 60-hour weeks. But it also is a major factor for burnout for most people. What I found is I ran into this cyclical pattern of burnout after that was quite prominent, and literally made me feel like I was like brain dead. I, would have times where I would just stare at my screen for hours, it felt like, or, suddenly the day was gone, and I was like, oh, I've been working on the same email for like way longer than I should. A lot of procrastination, a lot of lack of confidence, or just like struggling with, just kind of talking myself through how to get through things. And then seeing a backlog of work just become higher and higher and higher, like as the pile grew. And this eventually led me to go seek extra help, because it was happening around the same time every year. I was like, I can't go through working, like having 10 really productive months or 9 really productive months, and then 3 ones where I feel like, again, that I'm kind of like on mental life support. Especially when it comes to things where, it really started to freak me out when it came to like cognitive things, like I walked to the wrong train station just in a fog. I almost got on the wrong train to work. I just couldn't remember things that people were telling me. Like I just couldn't remember anything, and my memory's already a little bit like, but this was like really bad. So that kind of stuff was really bothering me. So I eventually, like a lot of people in the last few years, decided to seek an ADHD diagnosis, and eventually got one, which was helpful in a lot of ways. And it helped me frame my professional setbacks, but also frame my professional growth, and why I did well in the areas I did well in, why I struggled in the areas I struggled in, and allowed me to depersonalize it a little bit, especially with the growing number of people who were getting diagnoses, especially women of my age. I felt like, oh my gosh, like I'm not alone, and that was helpful. So, yeah, and getting on medication also was really helpful to build that battery back in. I've recently had to go off of it because I am currently pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm, struggling with burnout again. It's back. Yay. But it's something that I think now I really do see how medication was so helpful. And I'm really excited to go back on it once I'm able to. But yeah, that would, I say, would be the biggest one I've had to deal with without, when it was a professional setback, that was kind of within my control to an extent. And having to, just to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. And that's something that is really important to talk about as well because, as you said, so many people are getting diagnosed with that. And yeah, I mean, getting that diagnosis also helps with like, oh, because you're confused, you're kind of like, what's going on, and there has to be like an answer to this and all those things. But I think it's also important to look at how kind of you deal with it as well. So and the first thing is just looking for as much help or support that you can get. So yeah, that's something that um, I think that you've already done, and I'm glad that you're um, working on that. So yeah, that's amazing. But when it comes to, I'm just curious, when it comes to ADHD, like there's medication, but since you're coming off are there like any other ways
Yeah.
to deal with it, or
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Am I doing any of them well right now? I don't know. Not really, but I'm blaming it as a combination of pregnancy blame plus
Mm,
ADHD is like kind of affecting my follow through on some of these systems and ways
mm,
of, skills to cope with
mm,
it.
mm,
Um, yeah, I think some of the ones that I've learned the most are just prioritizing, like learning. I was just the classic person of over promising and under delivering, like to my
mm,
colleagues, to clients, to volunteers. I'd be like, yep, I'll get that to you tomorrow. Didn't get it to them
mm,
tomorrow.
mm,
So just being honest about like, I'm not sure when I'm going to get this done, but I'm going to try and get it done really quickly. People respond really well to transparency and candor in my experience. And that could be a privilege of mine, but maybe I get kind of like more of a pass as like a sometimes goofy white woman. I'm very like self-effacing, I'm like, well, sorry. And people love that vibe, and I just keep rolling with it.
yeah.
But
No, I'm glad that you do that because yeah, that's totally okay. And then I think that's something that is what I've noticed after talking to a lot of women is this is something that we all kind of have that in common where it's like first of all saying no. I mean, which I'm glad that I'm now starting to see a lot of people now say no. They say
mm-hmm.
like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the bandwidth for this right now.
Yeah,
Either you refer someone else to them that okay, sure, I can help you, but maybe that person can,
yeah,
um, which didn't happen before, to be honest. Like I never saw that, and that's kind of like what I looked up to, and I was like, okay, this is how it is.
yeah,
You just have to say yes. You can't say no. Um, and then the second part is like the whole like people pleasing thing as well.
yes,
That we care so much about how people like you or
mm-hmm.
approve of you, those kind of things as well. So um yeah, that's kind of like something very common amongst women. So yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, and it's more common if you have ADHD. There's a whole like subset of issues around what they call oh, I forget, like sensitivity syndrome, kind of. There's another word for it, but where you're hypersensitive to everything around how people treat you.
Oh,
So it's
interesting.
really easily so easy to like overly personalize, like
Mm-hmm.
read into things. Like if someone
Mm-hmm.
sends me back like a K, I'm like, they're upset with me, they hate me, this relationship is in jeopardy, um, and it's so easy just to go off the deep end with those thoughts. So you really have to work on drawing it back and just say like, I'm okay to say no to this person, I'm okay to set this boundary. um, if they have a problem with me, they'll let me know it's a problem. And if they don't, then it's not my problem. Like, it's up to them to communicate with me if there's something that's seriously bothering them. It's not up to me to read into it and then anticipate that there's a problem. Like, that's just not, you know. Um, and then, yeah, I think I've learned how to approach situations with more curiosity. So where I couldn't take any sort of criticism or feedback around a lot of aspects of my work, I now kind of like, it takes me a bit longer. Like, if I know that my boss or one of my reports or a client or a volunteer is going to give me feedback on something I've done, I like to be told in advance if they're going to, so I can just take a few breathers and be like, okay, this is not on you. This is like, you could be a quality person who doesn't always produce the most quality work, and that's fine. You can make mistakes, and that's fine. You don't have to be a perfectionist. Like, please don't be a perfectionist. So, and then just approaching, like, again, things with curiosity. So if someone, sends me an email that is like, obviously like a little bit angry or a little bit frustrated, that I could kind of just like take a moment to, instead of getting riled up by it and be like, well, they're wrong and I'm right, I can be like, you know what? I can appreciate from their angle that this is something that might be going on, or I can appreciate that this is probably how it seems, and they don't understand, again, the context of the bigger situation or what have you. So that's really important too, to remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like I wish that we were taught more about like communication, because at the end of the day, this is all, down to communication, like how effectively we communicate with each other. Even
Yeah.
like the smallest of things can make like a huge change. Like for example, like if my manager sets up a meeting with me and they just like put it in the calendar, like, okay, this is what we're gonna talk about. I'm not gonna like overthink on things like, oh, why have they booked a meeting with me, or things like that. And that
Yeah.
might be like so small and silly, but it just like brings so much peace at the end of the day. So yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes it's something that you need to like kind of reassess what you're doing and kind of figure out your strategy. Or sometimes it's just like, you know what, my brain's the way that it's wired. I'm just going to ask my manager to always like
Yeah,
give me like further context. It's like,
exactly.
sorry, I'm always going to freak out about this. Can you just let me know in advance what this is about? I've had similar conversations with my mother. I'm just like, don't send me a text that says call me now. Just don't. I don't want to know that. Like that's just going to put me into a spiral if I can't reach you right away. Like, just like,
Yeah.
if it's even if it's really bad news, just send it to me in a text message and we can talk about it over the phone. But I'd rather, like, instead of me stewing on it for like a work day or whatever, like,
True. True. No,
yeah.
that is very true. Um, this is a little bit of a pivot, but
Mm.
let's talk about leadership and mentorship. And yeah, first of all, I would like to ask you, like, what kind of leaders do you look up to? Like, what kind of qualities do you
Mm.
look in a leader?
Hmm. Oh, that's a great one. Um, I think my biggest quality is understanding, like empathy and understanding. I think that um, that's not always how leadership models, like that's not exactly always the qualities that we promote in leaders. But again, because of my ADHD and because I know that I'm just a person who's going to make a lot of mistakes, um, I really admire people who can make space for that. And I think that we are running in a world where there are tighter and tighter margins on mistakes and errors that we can make.
Mm.
There's less kind of understanding. There's less room for things to kind of go a little bit wrong. There's less kind of capacity for like pivots or like changing plans and stuff. So I really appreciate a leader that demonstrates that flexibility and that care and compassion to understand, like, basically, like, it doesn't all have to be perfect. And we can make errors and mistakes. And as long as we own them and kind of have like a plan in place. I mean, one of the great things about me is I make tons of mistakes, but I'm really good at like being like, I've already got like plan A, like B, C, and D figured out on how I'm going to fix this. So don't worry,
Mm.
Um, so yeah, but having that like space, because I think that there's a lot of, especially around flexibility, there's just so many things that people can be so inflexible about that really don't affect them. And for example, one of the things is that I could never work for someone who demands that I always be on time coming
Mm,
into work. Like, I just couldn't. I'm somebody who's a really big believer in output over input. So, like, I'm going to be giving you 8 hours of work. That
mm,
may mean I show up at 9:30 or 10. I'm
mm,
still going to be doing 8 hours of work. And that's like,
mm,
and, trust me.
mm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, so I think because the stress that, and my mom doesn't understand this at all. She's from a different generation, but she's like, I don't understand why you would turn down a job if they said that that was the most important thing about working there. And like, why would you do that? Like, why couldn't you just be on time for everything?
mm,
And it's just the energy that it takes me to be on time is energy that takes away from the work that I do later, because
mm,
it's just not easy for me to be able to. I suffer from a lot of time blindness. Things that
mm,
I think take 5 minutes, take 15 minutes. I try to
mm,
build buffers and all of that. I try to keep my life scheduled, but it's a practice that I continually have to exercise. It's never going to be what I realize now. It's never going to be a habit that just like I finally just kind of slot into really naturally. And so it just doesn't make any sense to me to pay somebody to spend that much time trying to be on time rather than paying them for something that's better than that, like an actual like new program or an actual like deliverable.
mm,
So that's one thing. Other leaders I look for are, again, people who, one thing I really want to work on is just listening more.
mm,
Leaders that don't take in preconceived notions, who come to meetings just ready to listen and then digest, and then
mm,
um, and who are really mindful about that.
mm,
Um, yeah, and that's something as a manager I work to be less talky and more listening-y, but that's still very much work in progress.
mm,
But I appreciate that space because I think that that's, it should be, the feedback loop should be a circle, right?
mm,
And if you're working for somebody who constantly kind of just gives you things to work on, but doesn't actually receive information going the other way,
mm,
it creates a lot of siloing. It also, as a leader, I think you kind of have to understand that even if you worked your way from the bottom, even if you have knowledge on how the organization works at different aspects or like levels of the organization, your you being at the top of the organization just muddies your bias and muddies your perspective. And
mm,
the greatest asset that you have with your employees is the fact that they provide that to you now, and you're not expected to know everything.
mm,
um, I think a lot of leaders do themselves a great disservice by assuming that they should know everything and they should have all the answers when they have the people there to be able to inform them on that. Yeah. So those are the most important qualities to me. Other than, I mean, of course, like the like treating everyone with respect, not bullying, like being a nice person type of stuff, which
mm,
I think just goes without saying. But
mm,
yeah,
mm.
unfortunately today it's not always.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the biggest values I see in companies that I want to work in
Mm,
is companies that are actually encouraging of you making mistakes and you making errors, and they care about is as long as you own up to it, as long as you learn from it, it's fine.
yeah.
So creating like that psychological safety is, I think that's a really important value. So that's actually something that I look for when I'm working for a company, like, or
Oh,
even
that's great.
management.
Yeah.
Like, oh, like how open are you to do to for that? And that is something that I would also encourage other people to do that as well, because that's honestly something that I feel like impacts productivity, but like other things as well, like your creativity too, because you're spending too much time just like worrying about those things, like you are a little one mistake, versus you could have spent that time thinking about doing something productive. So
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's something really important. um And then when it comes to your management or leadership style, so um, is that something that you've kind of adapted all these values to it, or is that like how kind of you see yourself growing into?
Yeah, absolutely. It changes all the time.
Mm,
And it should.
mm,
I think that, I didn't, like a lot of people, I was taking on leadership responsibilities and kind of aspects of leadership without really being that person on paper in the organization, or without it being part of my job criteria or like what I was doing. And so that built in a lot of imposter syndrome. A lot of, you're just like, well, I'm not really like the team lead. I'm not really the manager. But somebody has to be. And so I'm going to kind of step in and like kind of give this team direction where I don't see that it's being given. I'm going to give this team kind of like goals and like, a drive and like respect and support where I don't see it's happening. And I do that because I want to do that as a colleague. you know if there's a vacuum there, I'm happy to fill it. If there isn't a vacuum, I'm happy to leave it alone. um, so that's been kind of what early on was informing my leadership style, was the fact that it was coming from this place of being like, I'm just a colleague who really wants to make sure that everyone feels supported. um, then to actually formally becoming a leader who did have, in a more traditional way, who does have direct reports, who does kind of lead a team, and officially kind of, yeah, is that's what my job is on paper. um, I think what I've learned from being a manager and leading other people is a lot, still with my ADHD as well, like, not jumping to conclusions right away is a huge one. um, I'm a really fast thinker, and that comes with a lot of pros, but it also comes with a lot of cons.
mm,
And I'm not one to take a beat. So with people, it's about reading in and receiving information from them, but not overly interpreting it, and not making assumptions. Even if your brain is quick to like kind of go there, you have to give people the grace to reveal themselves to you. And you have to be a safe space, like you said. Like, that psychological safety is really important. If you can't guarantee a good reaction, and like a good reaction isn't like, has to be like rah rah, like this is really positive. A good reaction just has to be something that's like holding space for that person, even if you are disappointed in maybe something that wasn't done, or maybe there was miscommunication. It's kind of more about the like, okay, I hear you, this has happened, how do we deal with it. And so I try to be that person as much as possible. Being patient, just like kind of re-understanding or realigning myself with how it felt when I was somebody who was really overwhelmed and overworked, or like when I was somebody who was like, a lot of the people that report into me, they do so much work with so many different people. They're facing our clients, they're facing our volunteers. They're really just like literally running around the city to events and all this kind of stuff. And especially right now, as I'm like kind of, a little bit more physically unable to be as energetically like there alongside with them, I build in a lot of grace for just like things slip through the cracks, stuff happens. And then on the more positive side, I really truly believe in building someone up on their strengths. And it is hard because you can't afford to build a role specific to the person who's in it. Like, an organization needs to make sure that there's elements that are evergreen, especially when there's lots of turnover. And I've been that person before who is like completely customized role to me, and then has had to leave that role, like either got promoted or leaves the organization, and they're like, what do we do with this? We're having kind of the same conversation about my mat leave, because I'm so involved in the technical systems, and my role requires so much technical literacy, but it's also a leadership role, and it requires a lot of human people skills as well. And there's a lot of like, worry about, especially on a nonprofit salary, how to find somebody who's the right fit. Not to be big on myself, but that's just kind of what I've done. So in this way, I do kind of try and strike a balance. Like, it's like, okay, I understand that, you're somebody who doesn't really have a lot of faith in their technical skills, or you're somebody who doesn't like, doing a lot of design work,
Mm.
or somebody who doesn't like doing a lot of writing. How can we help you feel better about the writing that you just have to do, or like the stuff that you have to do that's in your job that's not, we can't take out? And then how do we put more emphasis, maybe a little bit more emphasis on the stuff you really enjoy doing? And a part of my job is like, I try to take like 20% of my time and be able to kind of fill in gaps where needed. So if I do have somebody who's working for me who doesn't have that technical literacy and just realistically is not going to learn how to pull this report within 5 minutes, that I've got the time to do that for them, where needed, as we kind of continue to teach them.
Mm.
And, and likewise, if someone's feeling like, like this week I took on like I took on a workshop because somebody was feeling a lot of social battery drain, and it's like, my job is to be flexible, to be here for you when that kind of stuff happens. And so the last thing I want to be is a really inflexible leader who's like, no, that's your job. Like, you're going to have to figure something out around that. Because I've been there before and it doesn't feel great.
No, definitely. Yeah, I think flexibility is so important, and especially after COVID, I feel like that's where it was like kind of proven that,
Mm.
you know, if you're flexible, you can be productive as well, as much as you were even before. So, um, yeah, I think especially for like women and mothers, especially,
Yeah.
it's really important because you're like juggling so many balls at the same time. It's really hard to be like, oh, you're limited now. So yeah, so I'm glad that now we definitely have like more flexibility, but yeah, we definitely need to work some more on that. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that with a small team, when you have some like personal circumstances really affect everybody massively. And that's something that, somebody has to be well in order to do the amount of work that we're asking them to do. And if they're unwell, and if we're part of the problem with that unwellness factor, or if we're not, like, regardless, like, we need to make sure that they're in a place to be able to,
Mhm.
to be able to function. And I've seen a lot of people become very unwell at work, including myself. And it again, I'm somebody who's actually had to retrain for the same job many times
Mhm.
in the last few years. And it's just a role that has had really high turnover, and that the amount of retraining I have to do, or even just covering of that role when we're trying to fill it again, is so immensely draining. It doesn't make any sense to me to burn somebody out and then just like look to rehire for that position
Mhm.
instead of making some small compromises along the way. It just,
Mhm.
that's the way I'd rather be.
Mhm.
Because yeah, I mean, companies right now, like, the way that they're burning out employees and staff, I hear so many stories
Mhm.
of people being bullied out of positions, of people being burnt out of positions, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just the amount of money and resources that company is going to spend trying to cover their position and then rehire for it, instead of just accommodating that person, or addressing the situation that they're in, is
Mhm.
kind of like, it's such, not to be like, I don't know, misandrist about it, but that's such a man's way, just being,
Mhm.
to me anyway. Instead of being like, okay, let's get into the nitty gritty of how we can make this work.
Mhm.
They're just like, just like, can him, get somebody else in, like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that is like spoken of so like in a laid back way, and make it sound so easy, which versus actually it's not. I had read like an article where it basically had talked about this thing where rehiring someone actually costs the companies more, and it costs them more time, more money, more everything. And yeah, and that's like one of the biggest mistakes a lot of companies do, um, when it comes to like managing their budgets and whatever. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I just read something recently. I don't know if it was like Fast Company or if it was just something on Instagram, but someone speaking about, like, your primary customer or client is your employee. is the
Mm-hmm.
person working for you. And because they will go above and beyond if they believe in your mission and vision and if they feel supported and cared for in that environment, which will reap back so much more to you than having somebody who feels like they're being taken advantage of or they're stuck. And so I really like, I really, when we hire somebody, like in the nonprofit world, they really kind of try and emphasize those benefits, which we can be flexible on because we can't be flexible on other things like pay necessarily. So it's kind of like, yes, you are knowingly like applying for a job that's not going to be paying you as much, but this is where we can actually really focus on helping you and your career grow, how we can get you quality life experiences. Like one of the most amazing things of working for Dress for Success is the number of stories that you encounter of people who are incredibly resilient and compassionate, brilliant geniuses, like people who are just, you wouldn't meet in any other context. And I think that adds so much enrichment to your life, but that's something that's really hard to put down on paper in a job description. So it's something I really like, I really focus on those things. And then I'm really transparent about what the bad things are, because I also I think a lot of leadership models are like, don't admit when something's not working. Don't admit when that this is a con of this job, and I'm kind of like, well, if we're not hearing people, then like, how are they going to feel like, like, I don't know, like, why can't we just be real about what the situation is and just understand or come to an understanding that that's, instead of trying to convince them otherwise. I'm not interested in gaslighting anybody into staying into a job. Like, yeah.
Yep, definitely. Um, and then I think the next topic I was really curious about was how, as we talked a little bit about this before, but when it comes to like AI and how it's going to affect, you know,
Mm.
the work that you're trying to do, the work that Dress for Success is trying to do. Um, so, how are you thinking of, like pivoting when it comes to AI and then kind of like adapting to it? Because obviously now that we have AI, people have a lot of resources that are available to them. But again, it's a lot of information. I think it's like actually too much information.
Mm.
um, but
Yeah.
yeah, how do you see that happening in the future?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. I'm by no means an expert. I feel like I'm kind of like swimming through this and kind of figure it out as much as everybody else is right now who isn't like either hasn't like studied it at length or like has been watching this for a while. Um, yeah, I've got a personal quandary with AI that I'm still trying to square away. And this is something that comes up at our work a lot. Uh, there's never enough people for the job and in the work that we do. And I know other Dress for Success affiliates, when AI became really big, people are like, just use the AI. It's amazing. Like, look how I used it. This like saved me like hours of work. And this was something that we had nobody else to do this job. So it's not even like we didn't hire somebody. We just used AI. Like this job was always going to be in the backlog pile of this mountain of work that I have to do.
Mhm.
And so, that's a really good aspect of it for the nonprofit world, because just being realistic about the fact that, again, I think we are, especially as an employment organization for like women, I think like we understand our values and understand like that we would never completely farm out a job to AI, that we would always want a colleague or like another person to do instead. So that's not where my personal quandary lies, but it's more in the environmental impact of AI. I have a lot of concerns, and I do worry that, that like over relying on it could kind of further facilitate a climate crisis with the amount of water and energy that AI uses, and us not even really being well informed about that. Um, and so that's where things kind of go back and forth a little bit. I also am a huge believer, like, I feel so old fashioned for this, but that you should learn how to do things for yourself. So, I do kind of worry about the impact it will have on language and communication. if people continue to use AI. It's one thing to use AI to like craft an email. Lord knows I've done it. Same with a form or whatever. But I try to take the time to really look at what it's crafted for me and seeing why it's better than what I would have done. So that I don't have to go back and use it again. I can be like, oh yeah, remember AI did this really great email and they made it so much shorter and like to the point and just clearer than I could have done. How can I learn from that? So yeah, and I think when it comes to the work that we do, it's not a competition. So many people need help. There's so many, like, if another nonprofit shows up in the same sphere of work that we're doing, we're not going to be like, like, it's great. When people have access to information that's quality, that's great. But to your point that it's not all quality, that is something that's a little bit trickier. So I think we've been doing more workshops on how to use AI effectively, knowing that people are just going to use it. Kind of similarly, like with with crypto, and us being an organization that wants to promote promote financial empowerment in women, we had to address crypto. Is this something that we, is recommended? What are the pros and cons? At first, we didn't want to even touch it with like a 10-foot pole because it's scary and it's just like, like, I don't know. But now it's kind of like, okay, no, we need to tell people about this. We need to talk about it because some women are sinking serious funds into crypto. And again, they don't have the privilege of, if this goes awry, that, this isn't going to backfire in some big way. So our finance speakers have become more informed on how to talk about it. But yeah, I think I really worry about the amount of jobs that will be, lost because of AI. So I see that our work will only become more important as more jobs are mechanized and kind of phased out of the working sphere, as we continue to lose that human element with people, and as people suffer and like kind of deal with that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that I've been hearing a lot about like hybrid models, kind of like AI plus the human part of it. So using AI to definitely like help you in the job that you're doing, but you're still kind of doing your job.
Mm-hmm.
um, because a lot of people do want that humanized approach.
Yeah.
We do acknowledge that, yeah, it's not completely something that, in every part of every job that AI can do it completely on its own. So, yeah, I think that would be an interesting part to see how that hybrid model works out and how people start to use it in a productive way where you're also not losing your creativity and you're not like leaning on too much of AI, but then using it in ways where maybe some of your weaknesses, I guess, like maybe you're not good at something and you can use AI for that, I guess. But yeah, it
Yeah.
would be definitely interesting to see how that happens. So
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to that. It could help people with like a lot of the things that they feel like imposters on. It can help, with really relieve a lot of stress in the workplace. The other thing, though, that I caution my, it's not like, again, I'm no certain ways an expert, but one of the things that I do also worry about AI with is this acceleration of productivity culture, which I think is already completely out of hand. If we think about like what people were achieving in the work on a day-to-day workday in the office in 1950 versus today, it's crazy. It's insane.
yeah, yeah.
Like, you had to wait for like you would send like a letter, you would have to wait for it to come back, you would have to phone somebody, you'd have to wait for them, like there was a lot of like in between stuff where people actually had buffers to like mentally think, and they didn't, and not to say that work wasn't hard back then. Like, I'm sure people, like, again, we've adapted to this crazy amount of productivity, and to think that like it's like, okay, AI is going to help our outputs by even more. and then knowing that because it'll be credited to AI, that doesn't mean that salaries are going to be going up. That means that profits are going to go up, but salaries are probably going to stay the same, which is going to create a further problem with the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. So I think that a huge thing, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of, even though I am kind of like a productivity hound, breaking myself away from that mindset and seeing a little bit less about like how much can I get done in a day or a week, and a little bit more about like what's the quality of work that I'm doing and how is this helping right now, and also how can I within my team kind of de-jeopardize a lot of the stuff that we talk about. Because I notice when AI comes up, it's because usually there's like some sort of false deadline that's been put on this, and it's like, just get AI to do it. Like, just put that through AI, it'll be fine. And I'm like, well, why are we like, why can't we just talk about actually how this is an unrealistic timeline, or how can we talk about how we can prepare for like these timelines? We're not actually changing the way that we work. We're just allowing for more of this frequent, like, this is an emergency that needs to get done now, behavior in the workplace, which I don't agree
Very
with.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Um, Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. And yeah, I'm really excited to see how our audience, takes these insights and uses them. But also, thanks for talking about Dress for Success, because I'm really excited for our audience to also know what kind of work that you're doing. And if there's
Yeah.
someone who needs like that support, they can reach out to you, they can reach out to Dress for Success. So I would encourage anyone to, if they need any kind of support when it comes to like employment or any kind of other support related to like your professional careers, please reach out to Dress for Success. They're amazing, and you will get amazing amount of support from them. Um, and
Thank you. Yeah, and just to add a further plug for anybody who's like, wants to give back, we have so many volunteer programs. A lot of our volunteer programs are oriented around communities. So if you're somebody who is thinking about becoming a client, you can also be a volunteer and be a client at the same time. Like, that's fine. That's exactly. Actually, we love that. If you're somebody who is looking to support a local charity that's doing really good work, or like, you just want to be a little bit more, maybe you're thinking a bit more about your local community and how, the problems that particularly the ones that we see in Vancouver, could be better ameliorated and, improved upon. I think that, again, we do really great work. And so we would love to have your support. I know I was haranguing a little bit on about donors before, but our donors are really generous. We're so thrilled to have the support of many different organizations, of individuals within the community, but we just want to get the word out even more. I think that, I mean, we didn't talk about mentorship as much, but we do have an amazing mentorship program. And I do think, if I can make any sort of plea, that if you are a woman who's experienced, your version of professional and personal success, if you've walked that journey, if you feel like you've done the work and you can look back and be with a bit of a smile on your career, then please consider becoming a mentor, because that kind of that ability to be able to, those learnings, that knowledge, that journey that you've walked is so instrumental in helping somebody else with theirs. And we have like a 6-month mentorship program where you meet with your mentee 1 hour a month. It's super easy to get involved. So yeah, please check out our website for that opportunity, among lots of others.
yeah, and I will share that link in the description of the episode. But again, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for being so open and vulnerable and sharing your learning. And really excited to see what happens next. And yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Another hallmark of ADHD is just like having, no filter. But I try to manage it in a professional way. So hopefully that came across. For anybody who maybe begs to differ, you can give me some feedback on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sydney.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so
You
much for
too.
having me, Priya. This has been a joy. And yeah, happy weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.